discovered that most professionals are really functioning from this state of chronic stress, which dramatically limits their potential, their creativity, and their ability to make aligned choices. So I knew that I had to add this work to my practice.
Welcome to the Leadership Laboratory, a podcast built to offer practical tips you can listen to in the amount of time it takes you to drive to work and apply them in the very same day. Thank you so much for tuning in and for your feedback. I want to celebrate and share a quick review from Leah. Leah shared, I have binge watched or listened to all of your podcasts at least 2 times so far. I really enjoy listening to them over and over again. Wow, Leah, thank you. I love hearing that the podcast is making a difference for you. And listeners, here's a fun fact. Leah is also part of the Leadership Laboratory community, which means that she shows up monthly, she holds herself accountable, and she is growing her leadership skills. So if you are looking for high value leadership development that is offered in a safe and supportive space, one that is very economically friendly, the Leadership Laboratory is exactly that. Come on over and join us. And speaking of feeling safe and supported, how's your nervous system feeling today? Do you feel stressed or do you feel safe? Do you feel on edge or do you feel calm? Did you know that over half of employees show up to work feeling stressed every day? And women in particular, 54% of women report feeling stressed throughout the workday. And since stress directly affects how clearly we think, the quality of our decisions, the amount of time it takes us to make a decision, and whether we respond thoughtfully or react impulsively, I wanted to bring in an expert on de-stressing and regulating your nervous system so that you can not only feel better at work, but also perform as your highest and best self. So if you're already feeling empowered to lead as your highest and best self at work today, well done, because that is evidence that you likely have a regulated nervous system. And if not, you are not alone. So turn up the volume on this one because that's exactly what we are going to help you with today. My guest is a nervous system business coach who has worked with leaders in high stress roles for more than 20 years. She is passionate about plant medicine healing, mid-century modern design, human rights, women's empowerment, conscious capitalism, and creating transformative experiences. Lindsay has a background in business, energy, mindset, and trauma. And on weekends, you'll often find her exploring live music in the far corners of her mind, also skiing the peaks of the Sierra Nevada mountains or camping under the stars with her family. Lindsay Troxell is a dear, dear friend of mine. We were introduced about 5 years ago, and my gratitude for Lindsay transcends words. Today, my hope is that you listeners are going to get to experience what I have had the pleasure of experiencing, that life with a little bit of Lindsay in it is a better life. Lindsay, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I don't know if there's ever been that kind of introduction for me before on a podcast, and oh my gosh, I'm feeling all the feels. Thank you.
Well, you're so welcome. It's so heartfelt and it's so genuine. And my only
Mm.
regret here is that we're not doing this in person.
Ugh,
Lindsay and
no.
I used to live a quarter of a mile from each other, maybe half a mile,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah,
Lindsay up and moved to Reno. But
I did.
I'm so glad to spend this time with you. So
Mhm.
there have been times in my career when I was sitting in a meeting with something important to say, but being so scared to say it. There were times that I could feel my heart pounding so hard that I would look down at my chest to see if it was noticeable. I almost felt like a cartoon with my heart beating outside of my chest. And what I didn't know then, but what I know now, is that was a clear sign of my nervous system being in overdrive and compromising my performance at work. And so before we get into the anatomy of what's actually happening in our bodies, Lindsay, can you tell us what got you interested in studying the nervous system?
I've been a executive coach forever, my entire career. I'm very blessed that I realized very quickly out of the gate that that's what I wanted to do with my life. And so, for 20 years, I would be working with high performing leaders and I would give them the techniques and the tools and the tactics and just follow this script and, post this many times on LinkedIn or develop your niche or do X, Y, and Z and you're going to get better results or manage your team this way and it's going to be more effective. And they wouldn't take action. And so I was like, there's something here. If these strategies are so sound, why aren't they taking action? So I moved more into mindset work.
Uh-huh.
And that helped a subset of people, thinking about what are the tiny sentences inside of your brain that are causing you to not take action or take misaligned action. And that worked for another subset of people. And then there was another subset of people that still weren't taking action. And so I finally said, what is this missing piece? And it was the nervous system. Then most times we don't feel safe, in those instances that you're talking about where you're sitting in a meeting and your heart is beating out of your chest. Yes, a portion of that is coming from thoughts and, the feelings that it's creating. But sometimes, hardwired into our body, there is a feeling of not being safe. And
Mm.
so, regulating your nervous system and learning how to manage stress more effectively became a critical component of the work that I was doing. It
Mhm.
also helped me personally with resolving my own burnout that I was experiencing in work. So, I discovered that most professionals are really functioning from this state of chronic stress, which dramatically limits their potential, their creativity, and their ability to make aligned choices. So I knew that I had to add this work to my practice.
Well, it sounds so impactful that not just for you, but for your clients, and you wouldn't be where you are without that work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you, Lindsay, give us a high level overview of how the nervous system works? Because I work with a lot of women and men in STEM industries and technical environments, and talking about the nervous system isn't something that comes up a lot throughout the course of
Sure.
our normal work days. So, can you explain the anatomy of it, please?
Absolutely. And I'm going to say it's super high level and the pertinent points here, but essentially our autonomic nervous system is essentially our internal navigation that and protection mechanism that
Mhm.
is responsible for things like breathing and heartbeat and how we respond to stress and how we interpret what we see and we hear and we touch and we taste and we smell, right? So our autonomic nervous system operates through two different states: the sympathetic, that fight or flight response, and then the parasympathetic, the rest and digest. Now, polyvagal theory, for some people who are interested in the vagus nerve and its connection to stress, um, that adds a little bit of complexity, but also clarity to our understanding of how our nervous systems work. And it does that by teaching us that neither state, either that sympathetic or parasympathetic, is actually ideal, but rather it's our ability to move freely between our states. That's what we're looking for. So that flexibility, if you will. So what we want is really to be able to operate within what we call our window of either tolerance or our window of resilience. That's where we are our most social and connected selves. So if we're overactivated, right, we're more in that stressful state, it becomes hard for us to have that connection. This is also, where we're able to start experiencing things that could be stressful, but they're tolerable, right? So our thinking and our feelings still stay online. So when we're in that meeting, we want to make sure that our window of tolerance, our window of resilience is as large as it possibly can be so that we don't feel like we're getting drastically dysregulated. Leaders really need to understand this because our nervous systems fundamentally determine how we perceive challenges, how we make decisions, how we interact with others. So when we're in a regulated state, we're responsive and we're creative and we're collaborative. When we're dysregulated, we become reactive and defensive, and we limit our thinking, right? Our brain actually goes offline. Our prefrontal cortex will go offline. So when leaders are operating from that chronic state of stress, it will narrow your perception and cut us off from your most innovative and creative capabilities and capacities. So, yeah, that's why understanding our nervous system is so impactful. It's helping us recognize that high performance isn't about pushing harder, but actually about creating internal safety that allows our most adaptive, intelligent selves to emerge.
Yes. Yes, it's not about pushing harder. And it's so fascinating to hear you talk about this because this is foundational to everything else we do, yet it's not something we're taught in school. It's not something that companies include in their onboarding package, and yet it is as a direct impact on not just performance success but well-being at work. And with the
Mhm.
with the interaction of sympathetic and parasympathetic, I had a hard time remembering which was which for a long time,
Mhm.
because to me, sympathetic means something different, but sympathetic is fight or flight, and then parasympathetic, like you said, is rest and digest.
You got it.
And I heard somebody say, "Think about parasympathetic like a parachute," right?
I love
It's
that.
there to
Yeah.
help you be in that safe rest and digest space.
Yeah.
So that then locked it into mine. So hopefully that is a
Yeah.
helpful tidbit for everybody else as well. And
Yeah.
you mentioned the polyvagal state, and that's vagus nerve is something that we've talked about in the leadership lab.
Mm.
10th cranial nerve, the butterflies in the stomach, and then we can rabbit trail on that topic on a different day.
Oh my
But
god. Yeah.
it's all connected and it's all talking.
All interconnected, and that's the thing that's so important here is that, that internal network it is a complex one, but it is something that over time we have the ability, especially when we're gentle and slow, to make
Mhm.
some really significant changes. We think that we want to, and we'll talk about this more, but like we think that in order for something to be successful, you've got to drive harder, you've got to go faster, it's got to hurt, it's got to, and this work with the nervous system and somatics and fascia, it's all about slow and gentle. And that's what the body responds to. It's creating that safety internally that we're all looking for.
And very different than a high-paced environment or, one of the things in the oil and gas business, we say the oil field never closes, and
And
and that's true, and so there's this expectation of quick response times, which is fair. However, a quick calculated response time is different than a fast reactive response time in the results that you'll get.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that one of the most problematic feelings that my clients tend to frequently act from is urgency.
Mhm.
And, that can feel like the energy surge. When we talk about somatics, it's the understanding of the way that your body is experiencing the world as you are going through it, and the feelings and the sensations that then cause us to either operate a certain way, get a undesirable result. And urgency is one of those that can create major surges of electricity inside of the body that cause us to want to act. But when we act from urgency, we usually get horrible results. I know I do.
Yeah, not my
Bad.
most defining moments either.
No.
Well, so key characteristic of executive presence is being able to stay calm in the urgency, to stay calm under pressure, and
No.
that's what makes the leaders that people want to follow. So, how does this tie into having good executive presence, healthy executive presence?
Well, I think that, you just nailed it in the fact that executive presence is about being calm, but it's not about the appearance of being calm. It's about genuinely being regulated.
Mhm.
And so when your nervous system is balanced, you radiate different energy. You're present, you're responsive instead of reactive. You are more like authentic and powerful. So your body is communicating that safety and groundedness before you even speak a word. Right? This isn't about suppressing emotions, but about having the capacity to feel deeply while maintaining clarity and purpose. So I think that's the most important thing here is, when we do this nervous system work, we really have the ability to be experience all of the ranges of emotions, but do it from a place where you're not reacting, you're responding.
Almost like, if I'm hearing you correctly, working with your emotions rather than against them, because the emotions are going to be there, and suppression of the emotions is just adding
Yeah.
another element of energy that you need to dedicate to it, which is moving you further away from authenticity.
Absolutely. I had a conversation with one of my clients yesterday, and I was like, it's perfectly fine for you to be afraid right now. It's totally cool for you to experience fear, but you want to sit with the fear instead of raging against the fear, right? Like, and fighting against the fear. And that's what's happening when when your nervous system is dysregulated. Like, you're resisting experiencing the emotion. And
Mhm.
so it's like you're either fighting against the emotion, think fight or flight, fighting against the emotion and not wanting to experience the emotion, or you're running from the emotion and not wanting to experience the emotion, or you're
Mhm.
freezing and you're getting stuck in it and like you're just clamming up. And so this allows you to experience any feeling and recognize that, you know what, that feeling, as uncomfortable as it is not actually going to kill you. And that's the core of all of this work is like ultimately we're all just afraid we're going to die, right? Like the spirals when we talk through some of those thought patterns, it's like this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens and then I die, right? And so that's where we are taking it back and we're pulling out that primitive brain, right? Our primitive brain is beautiful. It was designed to keep us safe. And it does that job by constantly scanning the surface. And whether it's an uncomfortable conversation or a tiger outside of a cave, right? Your brain doesn't really know the difference between the two. So
Mhm.
that mildly uncomfortable conversation becomes incredibly threatening. And so this gives you that ability to sit with the emotion and be present with the emotion and embrace the emotion and notice what's literally happening inside of your body. One of the things that you and I have talked about is like sometimes we sever the connection between our brain and our body. We live so much in our brain, and our brains are beautiful and they do so much for us. But we tend to think that we need to think our way out of a problem or a situation. And there's like we can logic ourselves through this. And the reality is, if we integrate the brain and the body and we notice what's happening internally, those sensations where we tense,
Mhm.
that gives us so much additional information and we can release and dissipate some of that internal anxiety when we just allow it to be there and let it go.
Mhm. And that can be incredibly uncomfortable for high
Hmm.
achievers who are used to thinking their way out of things,
Yeah,
but your body will always know your truth louder
always.
than your words, and your
Mhm.
emotions are always going to have better running shoes than you do, and they're going to
Yeah,
catch up.
yeah.
So the more we can be present and aware of that, and then have some actual tools, have some things that we can logically apply to something that transcends logical thinking, the better off we're not just gonna feel, we're also going to be able to perform.
Exactly.
All
Ex
right. So can we get to that toolkit, Lindsay? Can we get to a checklist of what are some ways, ranging from the basics to a longer term or a more
Mhm.
complex solution to help regulate the nervous system in both everyday and then even like intense emergency type of situations?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the thing that I think is really important for us to understand here is that there is a difference between hyperarousal and hypoarousal. And so, these are the different states that your nervous system can be in based on the situation. And so, hyperarousal looks like more of that fight or flight, that high activation state. So when you're sitting in that meeting and your heart is beating out of your chest, that's more of that hyperarousal state, that high.
And that could come not from a physical danger, but that it could come just because somebody said something or didn't
Oh
say
yeah.
something or an email landed in your inbox or any
Oh
of those
yeah.
day-to-day. Okay.
Yeah, it can happen because somebody walks by you and has a certain perfume or cologne, and it reminds you of somebody from your past that you had some uncomfortable interactions with. It can happen for a whole host of reasons,
Okay.
right?
So it can be a trigger of any size, sensical or nonsensical.
Any size. And, a lot of this comes from a lot of, especially the nervous system work and the folks that maybe feel like they are more dysregulated or find themselves in a more dysregulated state more often. The root of this really is trauma. And, it's basically impossible for us as humans to get through this life without experiencing some kind of trauma, whether
Mhm.
it's seen or unseen. Right?
Mhm.
Sometimes people call them big T versus little t traumas. I do not like that breakdown. I think, it's more like seen and obvious traumas, whether it's a death or, an assault or an illness or an accident, things that are pretty obvious. And then the unseen traumas can be things like microaggressions, right? Somebody says something to you that you're internalize and create a belief system, and it hardwires into who you are at your core. And
Mhm. Could
so,
it also be
yeah,
like something that you see on the news that has nothing to do with you, but
sure.
okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And I
Could it
think
could it also be like when your company is going through change or transition or there's unknowns or there's a new leader, you don't know how to read that leader yet. All of these things could be
all of those
small
things, right? And
trauma.
we're all interpreting them different, right? The brain doesn't actually care what something is. It cares what it looks like. And so if you've experienced something before, or maybe you have gone through a corporate takeover and that experience was horrible and now it's happening again, your brain is going to be like, "Oh, I don't care what this actually is. I only care what it looks like. It looks like this thing that I experienced before. So now I'm having dysregulation as a result."
Uh-huh.
So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it can be all over the place. The point is, right, that in that hyper aroused state, we have that higher activation. And so we have higher energy surges. In the hypo, that is more of that freeze or fawn state or a low activation. So that looks more like depression or shutdown or burnout or like listless, disengagement, right?
Mhm.
So that's when
Absolutely.
either we have operated at such a high activated state for so long that we have now crested over into this low activation state and we're starting to disengage. So that's the thing that we need to start with here when we're picking the types of tools that we want to put in place. So sometimes people will pick the tools that aren't actually going to be serving them. And then they're like, well, why isn't this working? So
Okay.
you want to
So
kind
like
of,
you need a screwdriver, but you're picking a hammer.
right, right.
Okay.
So that's the first one. So at
Okay.
work, we
So
mostly
so
see
just to
hyperarousal.
figure out, right? Call out whether this is hyper or hypo.
In work, most of the time, we see hyperarousal. So in response to deadlines, difficult conversations, mistakes, that's typically what we're going to see. Hypoarousal typically shows up when somebody is burnt out or put in very stressful situations that trigger a threat response for long term that then causes them to shut down. So if you're to that hypo state, it's probably because you've been living in the hyper state for far too long. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
step number one, let's say that you are in that high activation, hyper aroused state. There's a lot of things that you can do. And a number of these are great for just like in the moment situations. So 4-7-8 breathing, right? Where
Mm.
you're inhaling for 4, holding for 7, exhaling for 8. So that longer exhale then the inhale specifically is going to switch you from your sympathetic nervous system into your parasympathetic. So when people are like, I'm doing breath work, and Jamie, I know that this has happened for you before. So
Mhm.
can you share with me, like when you had recently experienced a situation and you were trying breath work, what was the specific breath work that you were trying?
I like the physiological sigh.
Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
favorite.
Where you breathe and then you have another breath at the top of that. Yeah. And what I realize, so I guess to define that, it's one big breath, and then at the top, another one, another little
Mhm.
one. And then to your point, exhale out for is double the roll, Lindsay, double the amount of time. Your
Typically.
exhale should
Yep.
be double the
Mhm.
amount of your inhale
Mhm.
to regulate your nervous system
Yeah.
and slow your heart rate.
The physiological sigh is, in my opinion, one of the fastest breathwork tools that will help you to re-regulate your nervous system. And I'll give you the science behind why. So think about there's this great book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it's all about stress. And like one of the core premise behind it, and a lot of the research is that you have to complete the stress cycle. So there's some cool studies that are out there. That there's one that was done in Israel where wounded individuals were coming into the ER, and what they were finding is those that completed the stress cycle wouldn't end up with PTSD. Those that didn't complete the stress cycle were ending up with PTSD. And so the premise here is that we have to, like, we were only designed to deal with stress in 30-second bursts. And that's the tiger outside of the cave. But then we are supposed to couple that stress with running. And so that would be completing the stress, running and then shaking at the end of running. And so movement and like getting all of that energy out, all of the surges of hormones that are happening when we're experiencing that stress. But what do we do at work? You experience something and you're probably going to just sit at your chair, like you're typing away at an email and you're not moving. You're not completing the stress cycle. So the physiological sigh is the perfect example of completing the stress cycle. We typically see this in babies, right? When they are throwing tantrums or they're crying. I mean, does Hollis do this ever? Like, after a really big cry, the baby will breathe in, and this is always through the nose. So breathing in, right? They have that like end to the cry. That's completing the stress cycle. And so that's why it's so incredibly effective. So that's one of my favorites. I love that one.
Well, and it's with
Ground.
all these mechanisms too, they're already built in as
Yeah.
systems in our body, but until we have awareness of it or realize
Yeah.
I can voluntarily do this, not just involuntarily and have the same result, like that's really powerful.
So powerful. And as adults, we forget the inner wisdom that our body has. Over time, we've been told, like, hey, don't fidget. Like, how many times has somebody told you that from an executive presence standpoint, like, if you're sitting there and fidgeting, that's not really a great thing. I'm neurodivergent. I'm on the spectrum and I have ADHD and I have a dyslexia. So, like, I'm fidgeting all the time. And that's part of, my stimming activity that allows me to move the energy through me so that I'm not creating a dysregulated nervous system. But we've been told, like, don't fidget.
Mhm.
So we've got to remember. So much
Mhm.
of this practice is about remembering what the body already knows how to do,
Mhm.
because we
Yeah.
forget. And then what you'll find is, like, once you start to practice that physiological sigh as one of the tools in your toolkit, your body will just start doing it more frequently. And you'll
Mhm.
actually be like, oh my God, my body just did that. It just knew to do that because it needed it. Isn't that
Mhm.
interesting? But
Very
until you start
interesting. We
tuning
built the
into it,
muscle.
yeah, so good.
Yeah. So far, we've got the 4, 7, 8 breathing,
Yep, the physiological sigh.
physiological
Grounding.
point.
Grounding is one of my favorites, even if you can't go outside. So I would say the grounding activity where you go outside, that's a little bit more involved, where you are taking off your shoes and putting your feet in the grass, and you're really connecting to earth and feeling what it feels like to ground yourself. Another very easy grounding practice, let's say that you're in a meeting and experiencing something challenging, is to press your feet into the ground
Mhm.
and just notice your feet in the ground. Feel your seat bones in your chair. Do a quick scan of the room and look around the room and notice where your body is in space. So part of this is proprioception, understanding where your body is in space. And then the other part of this is interoception, understanding what is happening for you internally. And so that kind of grounding practice can be very effective in the moment when you're trying to re-regulate quickly. So some
Love
of
it.
these
And
are
if you can do it outside, great. However, if you're
yeah.
on the 27th floor of your office building, you can still do it by just being very intentional about pushing your feet hard against the floor.
Hard into the floor. What you're doing here is you're telling your body, again, I am safe. I am supported. Literally, physically, I am supported by my chair. I am supported by the ground. Some of these things feel so incredibly silly because, again, it's not the hard and the fast and like the, majorly profound. It's gentle, it's slow, it's almost imperceptible. But what that does for your nervous system is it does shift it back into the sympathetic. Or sorry, the parasympathetic. Yeah.
Parasympathetic. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I also love things like tapping your toes. So like feet where your heels are together and then you tap your toes. That stimulation also re-regulates your nervous system. Shaking it out. This one can be really powerful if you've not done where you shake or like bounce. I have a rebounder in my office. So if I'm experiencing something, straight to the rebounder and I move that energy out through my body. That is incredibly effective. That also, whether it's hyper or hypo, is a really effective tool. Hypo, it brings more energy into you. Hyper, it moves energy out of you. So it's kind of a double bang for your buck.
Love it. And is rebounder a fancy term for a trampoline?
Sure is. Yep. Sure is.
Okay. And would jumping in place do the same thing?
Sure does. There's
Okay.
actually a really great video that's been going around, a 7-minute full body wave exercise where you kind of like wave your arms up and wave your arms down and then you swing your arms to the side. It's all over Instagram right now. And
We'll find it and we'll put it in the show
yeah,
notes here.
I will send it over to you. It's just a simple 7-minute workout that is a full body workout, but it also is stimulating your nervous system. If you do that once in the morning, it sets up your entire day for being so much easier. But it also is a great, if you've got 7 minutes and you can hide in a closet or, you're totally cool doing this out in the bullpen, wherever you are.
Yeah.
This is a longer practice that is very effective.
That could be a team building exercise.
It sure can. It sure can.
I think what's important to know about what you just said too is that there are some things that you can do in the moment. Like it will be in response
Yeah.
to something that's happening. Also, when you're proactive about this and you look at it as a conditioning exercise, just like if you want to build strong biceps, you don't want to wait until somebody throws you a
Yeah.
25-pound weight and say, oh, hang on a second. Let me go knock out some curls. Okay, now throw me the weight. No, you got to do the lifting in advance
Yes.
because the weight never gets lighter, but you get stronger. And so the more you're intentional about practicing a grounding exercise or shaking it out or tapping or the breathing and doing that in the moments before you need it, the more prepared you'll be when you do.
That's really what allows us to widen that window of tolerance, right? So many of these things, we think that, okay, great, we've got some tools and techniques in those acute moments where it's happening. That's great. But this is not just about those moments. You have to be widening that window of tolerance. And a great way for you to track this is heart rate variability. So, if anybody's wearing a smartwatch, chances are you've got heart rate variability right on here. You can tell whether or not your vagus nerve is really online and acting the way it's supposed to based on your heart rate variability. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it, but heart rate variability is a great indicator of how flexible your nervous system is. So directly being able to look at that.
All right, great. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's a couple of other ones that I love for like in the moment. Humming, gargling, singing. Like humming to me, I think is the easiest one for us all to do. That's a great vagus nerve stimulator. That vibration, it's very similar to Om chanting, right? That real deep Om, right? That vibration has magical effects for stimulating our vagus nerve and creating more nervous system flexibility. Bilateral stimulation. So, just sitting here and tapping either side of your body or looking up to the left and looking up to the right. These things bring your nervous system back online, create the internal safety, and you'll start to notice that you have more clarity, more connection. Things don't feel as challenging in the moment.
I really love the bilateral stimulation too. And for anybody who's listening and not watching on YouTube, Lindsay crossed her hands across her arms in front of her chest, and with her right hand tapped her left shoulder and left hand right shoulder. It almost looks like we're flapping our wings here, Lindsay.
Yeah. It totally does.
And that, to me, that makes so much sense. I mean, I know it's not anatomically how it works, but just to think that I've got my parasympathetic nervous system, my sympathetic nervous system. If I could just cross over, I can essentially get the two to overlap and play nicely together again and experience that regulation. So that visual is very helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, you can do things like binaural beats are also a great tool. Same thing, bilateral stimulation inside of the brain, bringing both hemispheres back online together so that they're moving more synergistically. That's what we're doing here, right? It's giving us the ability to synchronize.
Yes. And that's also something you can just look that up on YouTube, binaural beats, and a lot of options.
A lot of
Okay.
options.
Well, I love our comprehensive list here. This is fantastic. There's also the more extreme, like cold plunge, go
Cold
for the
plunge.
run. So, things we might not necessarily have access to at 1:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, but
But I will say, so we think about cold plunging, again, if we're talking about more of that long-term impact versus the short term. So like, yeah, doing cold plunges, amazing long-term benefits. If you're in the moment, splashing water on your wrists or splashing cold water at the base of your neck, like taking a cold compress and putting it at the base of your neck, again, that's going to help to regulate your nervous system by activating your vagus nerve. There are TENS unit machines that you can connect to your earlobe that will do stimulation to activate your vagus nerve. But the longer term, I think, to your point, Jamie, the practices that I see that are most effective that you're doing on a regular basis for maintenance are things like fascia rolling. So that's one that not a lot of people associate with nervous system, but your fascia is what traps the trauma. That's where these interactions are getting stored. And so if anybody experiences chronic pain, that's coming from the energy being stored in your fascia. So rolling on a regular basis, that's super helpful for maintenance.
And I like to think about emotions and food being very similar, that we have to process and digest both. And that's very obvious with food if we don't, right? We experience discomfort and nobody likes that. But emotions, which are not as tangible as food, work identically. And so if you've got an emotion that you have suppressed, that you haven't maybe fully acknowledged, if you haven't worked it out, it's going to continue to impact you. And that's where the quote work is done to get present with what that emotion is. And when you do, that's when you stand the greatest chance of helping it move through.
Absolutely. The last thing I'll say here before we move on, because I know we do need to go, but the universal principles here are respect the body's current state, move slowly and compassionately, notice your sensations without judgment, create that sense of safety, and then avoid forcing or shaming the nervous system. So again, we move slow and gently with the nervous system. We do not move fast and hard. So even with things like rolling and fascia work, we tend to want to grind out our quads. And, if it's not hurting, it's not doing something. The opposite is true here. The nervous system and our fascia, all of our internal systems respond to gentle.
Okay, so slow it down is what I heard you say.
Slow it down.
So we can all exercise everyone's favorite virtue, patience.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, Lindsay, is there anything we haven't covered today that's important for listeners to know? Anything ranging from a success story or anything else that you would like to share?
I think I really shared that last piece. That's the most thing. This work isn't a quick fix. It's a lifestyle, right? It's about creating sustainable internal architecture that supports your highest performance. This isn't just about managing stress. This is fundamentally redesigning how you show up in the world and recognizing that your body is not just a tool, but a profound source of wisdom and intelligence.
So give it the permission to learn and to share its wisdom and to impart what we probably already know. We just have to drop in to hear it. So powerful. Lindsay, what is one experiment, right? Because as we are here in the Leadership Laboratory,
Mhm.
what's an experiment that listeners can take action on to help regulate their nervous system and experience the benefit of the amazing ideas and practices you've shared with us today?
So this is one that I think we all need to start with. It's start a 5-minute morning nervous system check-in. Sit quietly, breathe deeply, and just simply notice your internal state without trying to change anything or interpret what it means, right? Just be present with it. Let the
Mhm.
thoughts go, let the feelings be. And at first, you might not notice anything, especially if you have experienced trauma, right? There is that cord cutting that does happen between your body and your brain. Or if you're neurodivergent like me, where we have a harder time connecting to that interoception, it can be very challenging. But this practice over time will help you bring that interoceptive awareness into play. So your ability to read and understand that internal landscape will improve over time. And as that interoception develops, you'll be able to go into more stressful situations and respond rather than react. If nothing else, you'll be better at pausing and giving yourself the space. So the experiment is start with 5 minutes in the morning and just simply sit and notice the sensations in your body without trying to figure out what they are.
Okay. So just observe, be present, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah.
All right. I think we can do that. Lindsay, I want to spend the entire rest of the day with you. We've got to land the plane here for now. Where can we find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Lindsay Troxell, Troxell, Lindsay with an A. I'm also on Instagram at Lindsay Troxell. And then my business is called Our Coaching Initiative. So you can find me at ourcoachinginitiative.com.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. This has been such an honor and a pleasure to spend this time with you.
Real.
And listeners, to you, thank you for tuning in today. And now it's your turn, right? Test out what you learned today. Make this time count. And if you want to hold yourself extra accountable to truly flex not just your nervous system muscle here, but your leadership muscle, come on over. Join us in the Leadership Lab community. And because you've listened to this podcast, you've got a promo code. It is podcast. That is the promo code you can use for $100 off of your membership, which literally takes it to less than $25 per month. So go to jamiemckinney.com/lab for that. Well, thank you again for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review. And until next time, listeners, keep experimenting, keep growing, and focus on progress over perfection.